Welcome. Welcome to the stream for today. It is Friday. It's 1:30 here in Nova Scotia. A little later today because of my calendar. But we're going to go into our devotional now. God bless you wherever you are, whenever you are, when you're up and be watching this video. I hope that you're doing well and that life is well for you this day. We're doing our devotional. We're in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 2 today. And so I'm just going to dive right in and we're going to look at this. I want to remind everybody, as I usually do, just a little bit about the context of the verse. Even though we only do one verse in these devotionals, I want to remind of the context so it helps us understand it. Here in chapter 3 of Proverbs, we're looking at verses, at least in the first portion, and I would say even in the later portion, we're looking at ideas that are expressed over two verses. So even though we're doing one verse at a time, the idea is expressed over two. So I'm going to read two verses, but I'll focus on the one. In today's verse is verse 2 of chapter 3. The the idea in Proverbs chapter 3 seems to be this idea that's being presented over and again. If you do this, this is what you can expect. So it's kind of a causality thing, right? Of do this and see this, or do this and that effect is something you can look for. The first couple chapters were a little different angle, and so it's kind of neat as the book goes on how it does these different views of the subject. So that's the case. So I'm going to read verse 1 and 2, and we'll focus on verse 2. And here it goes. Proverbs 3, verse 1 says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments." Verse 2 says, "For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you." So you can see that kind of cause and effect thing, right? Do this, and this is what happens. And so yesterday we talked a bit about the idea of not forgetting the teachings and what it means to keep the commandments of God. And so that was the investment. That was the action we do to invest. And today we're going to focus on this idea. If we do that, well, length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. So what this is kind of saying as our starting point is it's saying God's wisdom. When we take the teachings and the commandments of God into our life, we do all that we talked about yesterday about doing that. It provides for us more life, longer life, right? Length of days and years of life, right? So more life, longer life, and peace all along the way. Not a long life of distress, a long life of peace in it, and that's a pretty good goal. When you're young and you're thinking about all the things you might want in life, the career and the family and everything else, you might think about, that's what I want to live. That's what I want my life to be. You may not always think about it, but thinking it'd be nice to have a good, a life full of days, a good life that was peaceful. It was a good life to have lived. And that's kind of what this is saying. If we take God's commandments and internalize them, keep them, that's how we get that. We don't have to go to college to get it. We don't have to be born in the right part of the world to get it. We don't have to, be the right kind of personality to get it. If I just take God's commandments and bring them into my life and keep them, then it will produce in me longer life, better life, peace. That's pretty valuable. The New Testament puts it this way in a couple places, but one in particular that comes to mind is in Romans chapter 8, verse 6, where it says that the mindset on the flesh, right, the worldly pursuits, is death. But the mindset on the Spirit, on God, the one who gives these commands, it literally uses the same words, life and peace. That's Romans chapter 8, verse 6. The mindset of the Spirit is life and peace, right? And that's the thing. I mean, that's what we want. That's what I would think any of us want, and that's how to get it. So let's go through our questions, our 4 questions. Right? What about people who keep the teachings of God and die young? Seems like an obvious question, so I'm going to address it. Sometimes skeptics of the Bible will see a verse like this and they'll go, "Oh, I know all kinds of people who live moral lives, good lives, follow God's teachings, and they ended up having misery and distress, and they died young or something in a tragedy or something like that." And they'll act as if that's somehow proof that it doesn't work. But it's a misunderstanding of the verse. The verse isn't an absolute promise, like saying if you drop a ball, gravity will take it to the ground. It's not that kind of a promise. It's not saying that. It's more like the promise of something like this. If you eat and exercise, you'll live a longer, healthier life, right? But don't we all know somebody who eats and exercises and dies in a car accident, right? Are we going to say, well, there, see, eating and exercise doesn't do anything? Well, I would hope we wouldn't say that, because that would be kind of foolish, right? Like it's that idea that if I live by the commandments of God, all things being equal, I'm going to live a longer, happier life. I mean, sure, some idiot with a gun can end my life early. Sure, that can happen. But all things being equal, living by the wisdom and the teaching of God is going to make your life longer, happier, and fuller. It just is. In the same way that exercise will give you a longer, happier life, actually. And yes, you could still die, even of a heart attack because of some random thing that happens in your life. I mean, that can happen, sure. But on average, it won't happen, because there's a power to the exercise for your body. And there's a power to your whole life and being in God's commandments that this just has that wonderful effect. And it really does work. It really does. Question 2, how does wisdom extend my life? So how does that happen as far as the extension of life or the filling of life? How does that happen? Well, the more I learn God's wisdom from the scriptures, the more likely I am to avoid the things that are truly foolish, reckless things, dangers that would harm and destroy my life, and not just physically, but including physically, but even just emotionally and mentally and so on. Choices that I will tend to make choices that result in physical, mental, and emotional health, because God's wisdom, that's what it does. It leads us to those places. And so I will become less reckless or foolish, and increasingly careful and not paranoid, but careful, right? Sober and healthier. And then even in my relationships, one of the neat things in the book of Proverbs in particular, and throughout the Bible, is how it teaches us how to have really good relationships. And human beings are social beings. And when we learn how to have really good social connections, that improves our life, gives us better lives, more peaceful lives, and longer lives, right? And then after all that, it just simply gives you the favor of God. Like, there's a place in our life where we understand God's favor as undeserved, the grace of God. But then there's another part of God's favor that is actually earned, where you do something that He's pleased with. And He says, you know what? I'm pleased with that. I'm going to honor that sacrifice, or I'm going to honor that choice. And so there's a favor that is earned in that sense. The grace of God that saves us is undeserved, and that's another story altogether. but the favor of God that says, you've chosen well, you've followed my commandments, so I will supernaturally help you with all of these things. That's pretty good and worth pursuing. Question 3, how does wisdom give you peace? Okay, so it helps my life. How does it give me peace? Well, as danger diminishes, you worry less, right? Like, I never worry about getting eaten by a bear in my bedroom. I get worried about it a little more if I'm out camping in a tent, and I get worried about it a lot more if I'm out on a trail in the outback woods and I see bear sign. Then I worry a little more about it, right? The danger just simply increases, my peace diminishes. That's just a natural thing in life. And so if we learn wisdom that creates in us a wiser and less reckless way of life, then the amount of danger that's in our life is going to decrease, our worry is going to decrease, and we're going to feel less anxiety about things. Not just the dangers of physical things, but the dangers of mental and emotional and relational disaster will decrease, and you'll have less anxiety. And so it's a natural relationship there. And then also, when you learn God's wisdom, it increases your confidence that you're going to know how to deal with hardship when it does hit. And so you feel a little less afraid of the hardship, because you're like, well, I've learned things from God that's going to get me through that hardship. So I don't have to worry as much about it. And it gives me an increase in peace. And then also, very much relationally, as I learn the moral wisdom of God, I'm going to have less tension in my relationships, which is going to mean I'm going to fight less. The other side of peace, right? I'm not going to be a person prone to arguing and fighting and contention, so I'll have more peace, right? So it's these kinds of things that is why it causes peace in our life. It gives us more life, better life, peaceful life. It's worth it. Question 4, last question. Is the opposite true? If I don't keep God's commandments, will I have shorter, harder life? And the simple answer to that is yes. And I think it's obvious, actually. in the world, when you look at the godless throughout all the history of humanity, yes, there's been people who claim to be good, God's people who've done terrible things for sure. But the definite lion's share of disaster and hardship has gone to those who have rejected God. It's just clearly there throughout history. And so, yeah, the opposite is true. If we reject God's teaching, we don't keep it, then you're bound to have a much shorter and much more volatile and unpleasant life. You're going to have more anxieties, and you're going to have much more disaster. And so, yeah, we all know the guy who smoked his entire life and lived to be 90, but that's the outlier. The vast majority of people who live in the wake of live in that unhealthy way die young, and they suffer as they die. So it's true. So all of this together, the takeaway is this: if you want to have length of days and the blessing of the Lord, peace and confidence as you face this world that has rocky things in it, don't forget God's teachings. Keep his commandments, and you will find that they add to your life length of days and years and peace. Bless you as you pursue it. God will help you do it. God, I pray you will, in Jesus' name. Well, next week, just for the calendar here, I never do these on the weekend, so next week on Tuesday would have been the day, but I'm actually going to be out of town. Just check my calendar, but I'm going to be out of town on Tuesday, so I won't be having a devotional on Tuesday, but I will get right back to it on Wednesday. Lord willing, at 12:30 on Wednesday, we'll have our next one. We'll move on to verse 3. So God bless you. Enjoy your weekend.